Okay, hi everybody. My name's Nancy. You knew that, right?
Hi, Nancy.
And I am an alcoholic. And I am happy to be here. I had a week that was full of family stuff. And it was unexpected, and it was family stuff I did not want to do. But I did it. And, I guess maybe I'm old enough and I've been sober long enough that I get a lot of peace and satisfaction from knowing that I've done the right thing and knowing that I've done what I was supposed to do, even if I didn't want to do it. And that kind of makes me want to do it. I know it's a funny thing. It's part of being sober, though. That is how we do things. Okay, is that any better? I can't get closer. I really can't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it hard? No, okay. So we are going to talk about step 4. Step 4 is full of technical things, full of things that we have to learn, sometimes for the first time. So when I talk about step 4, I think I probably just give a lot of information. Some people in AA, some speakers in AA are just wonderful storytellers. And they're really the most effective speakers that we have, because when you tell somebody a story and they try and identify with it, it really makes a lasting impression, and you can learn a lot about listening to someone tell a story. But unfortunately, I'm not a particularly good storyteller. I'm not really much of a storyteller. I am, in fact, an explainer, and so that's what I do. So we'll take a stab at my experience and my understanding with step 4. It makes me think about where was I when I got to step 4 the first time in my sobriety. And when I got there, I wasn't really sure what I'd done. With 1, 2, and 3. I went through the motions. I said the things. I did the prayer. I did this, but I really wasn't sure what I'd done. And the truth was, I was pretty traumatized when I came in here by the life that I had led as an alcoholic. I couldn't have said that at the time, but that's pretty true. I was kind of like, yikes, now what do I have to do? I was not really impressed with all the discussions that I heard about God and third step prayers and stuff like that. It didn't really have an emotional effect on me. I did them, but I was still doubtful. I think a lot of us are still doubtful, but I wasn't drinking. And that's where I was when I was confronted with step 4, learning this process of taking an inventory of the things about self that caused me problems in my life. I was really unaware of the very powerful forces at work in my life because I'd come here and done the first 3 steps that were about to bring about a psychic change in me. And they were all forces beyond the thinking part of me. And in me, I know this is not true of everyone, but in me, I pretty much rely on my head. Going to my heart is a last resort. It's something that I have learned in sobriety to go there, that it's an important part of life. But I was still all in my head. And what's at work here in step 4 is beyond the thinking parts of us. And it's something we have to experience. Everybody knows, if you've been sober for a little while, that you have to experience complete defeat and surrender before you even want to come here and think about staying. If you got another idea, I say this all the time, if you got another idea about how to stay sober, if you got another idea about how to stop drinking, if you got another idea about how to deal with your alcoholism, go do it. Go do it right now. Don't even stay for the rest of the meeting. Go out, go do it now. Yeah, and if it works for you, you never, ever have to come back. But if it doesn't work for you, we'll still be here when you figure that out. So you have to experience that. You have to experience defeat. And that's really step 1. And in step 2, you have to experience, I had to experience, that there is a power here that helps people stay sober. There's something at work here. And if you sit through meetings for a short period of time, you can start to feel it. You can start to feel that there's something at work here. Not in everyone, but I definitely felt it. There's something. There's some people here that had something that I wanted. They had a way about them, a way of dealing with their problems, a way of really staying in solutions, a way of dealing with other people, a way of dealing with problem people that we have here all the time. That was very calm, very peaceful, very balanced. I love the sense of humor they had about themselves. They had something that I wanted. They weren't always angry and whining about something like most people that I met, at work, everywhere else in my life, my family, people complaining with no solutions. So I knew there was some power here that allowed people to change, and that was at work, and I wasn't sure it was at work in my life, but there was something here. And then the last thing I had to experience, not think about, is what I talked about last week. I had to begin to experience that the problem's me. It's a great relief to find that out. I didn't think so at the time. But when you think about it, what can you do anything about anyway? You can't do anything about him and her and those other people and the state of the world and the unfairness of it all. You can't really do much about that anyway. I can do something about myself. So it's really a relief to find out that the only thing that we're going to work on is ourselves. It's kind of comes as a surprise to some of us. I probably said this last week. I don't really remember. You come in and we complain when we come in about our spouses, our husbands, our wives. How they're treating us, and how it's not working, and problems with our parents, problems with our children, the boss that we don't like, the state of the world, all that stuff. The truth is, folks, we don't care about any of that here. We don't care about any of it. We'll listen to it, for a little bit anyway, but we really don't care about it. What we care about is ourselves. We're going to work on ourselves. That's the only thing we can do anything about anyway. So that's it. I came to understand right around the time I started doing Step 4 is that, other people got better results in their lives than I had gotten, and they were not as capable as me, certainly. They weren't as fortunate as me, certainly, but they got much better results in their lives than I had gotten by the time I got in here. So I need to start to learn, what is it about me? What is it about me? What exactly is it about me? And I'm about to find out, because that's what we do in Steps 4 and 5. So, Step 4 says that we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This moral inventory of ourselves. This is a step that gets a lot of press, a lot of talk about it. You hear a lot about it in meetings, as opposed to, for example, Step 7. You ever hear anybody talk about Step 7, really, except at a step meeting? Not much. So we talk a lot about Step 4, sometimes with a lot of fear. I think the most important thing about Step 4, it's not any more important or any less important than any other step that we do. It's just a step that we do. But the most important thing about it is that we begin to develop a habit. All the steps are really just good habits. We begin to develop a habit of looking at ourselves. And hopefully this will be a lifelong habit. We'll learn how to look at our self-centered, self-willed behaviors whenever we're disturbed. So that habit starts at Step 4, when we learn how to do an inventory of ourselves. Now, when I got to this point, I was not unused to thinking about myself. I mean, I talked about it last week in Step 3. I thought about myself all the time. I was thinking about myself and what I was going to do and what I was going to get and what I needed and how to get more of it and not to get the stuff that I didn't want and me and what do you think about me? And I was thinking about myself all the time. So I was not unused to thinking about myself. But the problem was the way I thought about myself, I never got any useful information. I never got any information that helped me to change anything in my life. So Step 4 is really a method that's given to us in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous to give us some useful information about ourselves that will allow us to look at ourselves differently and hopefully to change. So, step 4 is always about looking at the common manifestations of self. I love that phrase. It's a phrase from the Big Book, but it's the things that we all do that emanate from being self-centered. And they're not that complicated. Self-centered, self-willed people like me have 4 garden variety characteristics. There are things we all do. They are ways we all think. They are reactions that we all have, and the results that we all get. And they're pretty much the same for everyone. I mean, we all come in here, we think we're really different, we're really unique, I'm very special, I'm a special snowflake, only I have had this experience, and, it's not that way. We all do the same thing, and we all do it over and over again. And there are only 4 things. Self-centered, self-willed people like me, the first garden variety characteristic is we're angry. Now, some of us really experience being angry and rageful, and some of us don't. When I came in here, I had no sense of how angry I was, but I was always annoyed, always irritated. Everything irritated me and annoyed me. I didn't like anything. I didn't like the way you drove. I didn't like the way you wore your hair. I didn't like the way you talked. I didn't like your grammar. I didn't like anything. I was always rearranging, in my mind how everything was. I was irritated at everything. Now, my husband, who's a very emotional guy, when he's angry. His face turns red, the veins stand out on his neck. He doesn't do that much anymore. But, some of us are more like that, when you're angry, and some of us are more like the irritated, annoyed type. It doesn't matter whether you're angry, rageful, irritated, annoyed, regretful, remorseful, or blaming. They're all somewhere on the same spectrum. Self-centered, self-willed people like me, the first garden variety characteristic of them is we're angry. We're angry people. Life isn't fair. We think there are lots of entitlements, and we're victims. The second characteristic of self-centered, self-willed people is that we're fearful. Some of us experience that as terror. Some of us know that we're fearful. Some of us don't. I had no idea that I was a fearful person when I came in here, but I was always anxious about everything. I had this kind of low-level anxiety going on all of the time. People who are afraid are always projecting, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if it doesn't happen? Always projecting stuff about the future, throwing up roadblocks. Some of us are very controlling people because we're afraid of what will happen if we sort of get outside the box. Some of us are just paralyzed by fear. So wherever you are on that spectrum, that is the second characteristic of self-willed people. We're angry, we're fearful, and the third characteristic is that we are out of balance. We're either overreacting or underreacting to whatever's going on. Overreacting people exaggerate things, they dramatize it, they tell everyone with a lot of flair and their hair's on fire or whatever, and the reason that self-centered, self-willed people do that is because when you behave that way, it gets the attention on you, sucks all the air out of the room, and the attention's on you. And then some of us have the opposite of that. They underreact. I'm pretty much an underreactor. Like if you walk into the room and something wonderful's just happened to you and you're all excited about it and very enthusiastic and you start to talk about it, and my reaction to that will be, whatever. That's what I'll say, whatever. Because I don't want the attention to be on you. And I want the attention to be on me. So we're out of balance. We overreact, we underreact, we have a warped perspective on life. So those the first 3 characteristics. We're angry, we're fearful, we're out of balance, and the last thing, the last characteristic of self-centered, self-willed people is that we hurt other people. We hurt other people. We're not necessarily malicious or Machiavellian, plotting and planning. We're just thoughtless. We're just plain doodah thoughtless of other people's needs and wants. And we're basically unaware or uninterested or oblivious to the needs and wants of the people around us. And that's it. That's the cause of all our problems. Anger, fear, out of balance, and thoughtlessness. These are the 4 characteristics of self. They describe me, they describe how I lived, and they describe how I interacted with other people, and they pretty much covered everything. And so I need to find an inventory, a way to inventory this stuff, this jumble of stuff, and how it shows up in my life, so that I can find a new way of looking at it and get some useful information. So we come to the inventory part of this step. There are many, many kinds of inventories you'll find once you hang around AA for a while. Sometimes people write an autobiography. And the first time through, that isn't necessarily a bad idea, because people with no insight really don't know where to start. And so they just start writing about their lives, and that's what people have them do in treatment centers, and it's not a terrible thing to do. And for the first time around, it might be a helpful way to do it. If you went through the 12 and 12, this book that we have right here, and read chapter 4, and answered all of the questions that are asked of you in that chapter, you would do a really good inventory of yourself. That would be another way to do it. Sometimes people get the 50-page questionnaire from Hazelden or wherever, and that can help them get started thinking about it. If you go to the internet is absolutely awash with different kinds of inventories. So there's a lot of choices. I think that you ought to do the type of inventory that your sponsor tells you to do. That would be the one that you should do. And the one that I'm going to talk about tonight is the one that I think is the best one, and that is the inventory that's given us in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the one that I do. It's very simple. It always works. It's very elegant, and once you learn the method, you can do it on the fly, which is what we need to learn to do. You know, we're walking down the street, something disturbs us, a thought, an interaction. We need to find a way of looking at ourselves that'll give us some useful information. All of these inventories agree that we do them at once. You know, once you've done the 3rd step, go right into it. Do it at once, do it on paper, and start where you are. You don't have to get ready to do the inventory. Just do it, you know. And I really think I'm a believer in doing them on paper with a pen in your own handwriting. I'm not into the computer thing. I don't know what it is. But I think there is some psychic process that happens. If you think the thought, it comes down through your brain, out through your arm, or whichever arm it is, if you're right-handed or left-handed, comes out through your hand, you write it down on a piece of paper, and something different happens than if you're sitting down typing on a computer. So I don't let anybody that I work with do things on the computer. That's me. Maybe it's because I'm an old lady. I don't know. But that's the way it is. Everybody that I work with has to write it down on paper. And unless you have some kind of writing handicap, that's the way I think is the most helpful way to do it. So it has to be written down and on paper. So let me talk about the method of doing an inventory that's given us in the Big Book. We begin this process by making a framework that we can start to look at ourselves. And the framework is made up of a couple of lists. The first list, we make 3 lists basically, and the first list is a list of resentments. The second list is a list of fears, and the third list is a list of sex conduct. And I'll talk about why I think we do that in a minute. We talk about how they've shown up in our lives, and it simplifies it and reduces it all to the basics. So we have some useful information and gives me a framework from which I can begin to look at the patterns that show up in my life. And that's a really useful thing to do. And eventually, the causes. So the first list that we make is a list of resentments. That's anger that I hold on to and replay, like the replay machine in sports. And these resentments control my emotional life on that issue or that person or that circumstance, and all similar ones. It's a really powerful thing. And it may also dictate my behavior on similar circumstances or similar relationships. And usually I'm completely unaware of it. I'm unaware of what's going on, and I'm unable to look at it in any other way. So I list them. I write down the names of the people. I write down the names of the institutions that I am resentful about. And there are plenty of them. Some people are resentful about schools that they went to, or churches, or, the military, the IRS, God, whatever it is. People, institutions that I blame. And then give it some context. I just write down a little bit about, what is that resentment about? So that's the first list. It's the list of resentments. And, at the bottom of a resentment is just a very fancy word for fear. It's the ego, myself, telling me that I'm entitled to some treatment or outcome that never happened. And the truth is, we have to come to grips with the fact that there are no entitlements in a spiritual program. None. Zero. None at all. We'll get to that at step 7 and talk about that more. And sometimes this stuff is really hard. A lot of us come from very alcoholic families, a lot of abusive stuff, a lot of bad parenting and bad people and bad luck and bad breaks. But the truth is, you can hang on to that for 40 years, or you can get over it in 4 weeks. It's up to you. How you want to spend your life. So we're given a way to begin to start looking at it, and that's making a list of resentments. That's the first list. The second list that we make is a list of our fears, unconnected with any resentment. For those of us who are worriers and controllers, and fear is really at bottom. It's a terror that we feel when we start to recognize that we can't control what is, what was, or what's going to be, and we don't have any power or any faith in any power to guide us through life. And one way to help us identify these fears is a couple of questions that we can ask ourselves. And the first one is, what am I afraid to lose? All of us are afraid to lose something: our youth, our health, our money, love, security. All of us have a certain amount of fear about that. So what am I afraid to lose? What am I afraid that I won't get? The same things: love, attention, achievement, money, security. What am I afraid I won't get? And the last question that we can ask ourselves to help identify these fears is, what am I afraid that I'll get that I don't want? What came up a lot for me on that question is responsibility. I felt responsible for other people's happiness and other people's success and the well-being of other people. I felt responsible for it. And so I spent my life running away and trying to avoid it. So we can ask ourselves these questions to help identify our fears in life. I was a person who really didn't realize that I walked through life afraid. I was really afraid. Behind most of my choices in life was fear. I was afraid of other people. I was afraid of responsibility. I was afraid of not succeeding. I was afraid of how you were going to see me as a less than perfect, and it really took up a lot of space in my head. So a fear list is a big list. So we come to the last list that we make. It's kind of an interesting list. It's a list of our sex conduct. That's kind of interesting. I often wondered why sex is singled out as one of the lists we deal with in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Did you ever wonder about that? Why not money? Because that's equally problematic, and most of us come in here with problems about money. So, my thoughts about that, and this is not any part of the AA literature, this is just my opinion. Sex is such a basic thing to who we are, to our identity as humans. And it's a part of human relationships where we're especially vulnerable. And many of us are taught very narrow ideas about right and wrong about sex. I don't know about that anymore, but certainly when I grew up, that was the case. And when I grew up, it was a part of our lives that was very secretive and never, ever got talked about. And in addition to all that, it is a very powerful driver of human behavior and causes big problems. It doesn't get talked about. Money gets talked about, I think. So I think that the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous were very smart when they made it a necessary part of the inventory that we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous. So we make a list of our sex conduct. The questions that we answer here are right in the Big Book, and this is what it says in the Big Book. We reviewed our own conduct over years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where we were at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this down on paper and looked at it. And that's the list that we make of sex. How have I used the intimate relationship to get something I wanted at someone else's expense? Who have I hurt? In the end, I really think that sex is just another relationship, and we have to learn how to behave better. And this is the beginning of learning how to do that. And that's the end of the lists that we make and that we're asked to make in the Big Book. And sometimes when I'm working with somebody, I'll have a catch-all question at the end, because I'm talking about all these things like everybody has a well-organized mind, and these lists are all very neat and very well organized. But that's not how it works when we first come in here. We don't know what we're doing. We don't know what list it belongs on. All we know is that we feel like shit, and it's really painful. And we don't know what to do about it. So sometimes I ask people to write down just anything at all that really, really bothers them and keeps them up at night and is too painful to talk about and maybe too painful to write about, and anything that they would never tell anyone no matter what. And even if they don't know what category it belongs under, just get it down on paper, write it down somewhere. Because in order to begin to heal it, we have to be able to look at it. And in order to look at it, we need to get it down on paper. So we've got these lists, and now we have a framework. We have a framework to do the real work that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is to go back over these lists and begin to look at what the Big Book calls our misdirected instincts. What a quaint phrase. What an interesting concept. The first time I went through this, I completely missed it. I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought it was very quaint. I thought it was very stupid. I didn't think it would give me anything helpful. Now I know that just as the Big Book tells us, the most important part of the inventory is the misdirected instincts. And why? The Big Book says the misdirected instincts are the underlying cause of our destructive drinking and our failure at life. And that covers pretty much everything. So what are these instincts? And what do they tell us about ourselves? What we're going to do is go back over our list of fears, our list of resentments, and our sex conduct, and identify which misdirected instinct is involved. So what are these things? What are these misdirected instincts? They are basic human instincts. We all have them. They're our humanness. We each and every one of us have a social instinct, and that is our need to have the respect of our peers and to have standing in the community. Each and every one of us has an instinct for material security. And that's just like a minimum amount of stuff: clothing, food, shelter, a minimum amount of money. Each of us has an instinct for emotional security. We all need to love and feel loved and to care for and be cared about. And we all have a sex instinct. And those are 4 instincts. The instincts are our humanness. Everyone has them. They're not good. They're not bad. How I use them is who I am in this world. And they're really simple, elegant descriptions of human behavior. And misuse of them hurts us and the people that we're in relationships with. And so for me, what I found out about myself and what I have found out by working with other women is that in the process of going back through my resentments and my fears and my sex conduct, I learned that in my life, I'm just trying to satisfy my basic human instincts, but in inappropriate ways. I'm trying to get more from a person or a relationship or a circumstance than that person, relationship, or circumstance is offering. You know, it's like misdirected instincts are a really useful way of looking at bad behavior because the cause is irrelevant. We're not blaming anybody. We're not thinking of ourselves as victim, and thereby short-circuiting the process of finding the cause. My part, looking at my part in all human interactions. So what did I find out about myself in going back through my lists and identifying the misdirected instincts? The first thing I found out is that I, like a lot of other people, use material things when I'm really trying to satisfy emotional security. When I'm feeling insecure and unloved, I buy something. That's what.